There are many supposed mystery animals out there, so-called cryptids. Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, the Jersey Devil, etc. Of all these creatures, my personal least favorite is the Chupacabra. Compared to those others, it's a much more recent phenomenon, the first accounts of which date back only to 1995. In other words, the Chupacabra is younger than I am. For those who may not know, the Chupacabra is a fabled monster that was first reported from Puerto Rico and has subsequently been sighted all over Latin America, as far north as Maine, and even in Russia and the Philippines. This is fairly typical of cryptids. There are people out there who have claimed to see the Jersey Devil in Connecticut, or the Loch Ness Monster, anywhere outside of Loch Ness. Originally, the Chupacabra was described as a reptilian humanoid monster with large black eyes, similar to the Greys. As with all monster sightings, the descriptions vary to the point of uselessness, but all the first sightings mention sharp spines growing out of the back, head, and shoulders. As time went on, and the legend found its way to places like Mexico, the accounts began to change. Instead of a bug-eyed lizard person, eyewitnesses began to describe the Chupacabra as some kind of hairless, dog-like creature. The legend is further reinforced by a series of livestock killings in Puerto Rico that showed the carcasses of goats with 2 or 3 puncture marks on their necks, leading many to believe that they had been drained of blood, hence the creature's name, meaning goat sucker in Spanish. I do have a passing interest in cryptozoology, literally translated as the study of hidden animals, although unlike most, I approach it from a science-based, skeptical perspective. You won't find me on Animal Planet yodeling into the night and claiming to be making Sasquatch calls. I view it as more of a social, psychological, and cultural phenomenon, rather than a genuinely zoological one. Consider this. Large, hairy ape-man-like creatures are known from virtually all cultures across the world. Is this because such animals actually exist? Or is it because human beings as a species have a tendency to imagine such creatures, effectively bridging the gap between our world and the animal world? In the absence of a single sea monster carcass, champ skeleton, or pile of Yeti shit, I go with the former. What makes the Chupacabra so boring to me personally is that it never once gave even the impression of being a living animal, and is very obviously a cultural invention. Whereas things like Bigfoot at least somewhat resemble real animals, and data suggests that there are large as yet undiscovered species still lurking in the ocean, Chupacabra comes off as a cheap creation made by people with no real experience with the natural world. You know those goat carcasses supposedly drained of their blood? Well, that was never actually confirmed, and is almost certainly not true. The only way to determine that would be to perform a necropsy, which was never done for any of the bodies left behind. So what really killed them? The most likely explanation is that they were either killed by dogs or coyotes. The distance between the puncture marks corresponds to the distance between the canine teeth of large canids. Why didn't they eat the goats after killing them? Most likely because the goats died after the initial attack. They were attacked by young, inexperienced dogs and were initially able to fend off their attackers, only to die later from their wounds. Have you ever seen the movie Species? Madeline Tolentino has. In fact, she saw it just days before becoming the very first witness to the Chupacabra's existence. Is it a coincidence, then, that the creature she described is basically an exact description of the monster from Species, which is in turn a ripoff of H.R. Giger's Xenomorph? I'm not saying she thought the movie was real, but you'd be a fool not to think that her account was influenced somehow by her seeing the movie not long before seeing the Chupacabra. How about the later reports of hairless dog-like creatures? Many such Chupacabras were shot by farmers and later verified as dogs and coyotes suffering from mange by scientists. It is interesting to trace the evolution of the goat sucker as a cultural icon, but as a theoretical mystery animal, it fails utterly. So that village, you know, the one just outside Guadalajara, the small farming village where all those goats and cattle have vanished, and all those six-toed footprints were found, the village where all those disemboweled children's corpses were discovered lying face down on people's property over the last month. It's not the Chupacabra. Remember, the Chupacabra doesn't exist.